Gavin Evans is an energy reporter from Freeman Media. Now, he's been covering the energy sector for 30 years, so ironically, Gavin will probably know more about the energy sector than, well, certainly a few ministers that we've had recently or even currently. He joins us now and to talk about the energy sector in general, obviously the electricity crisis in specific, and what options government have and why we're in the mess that we are. Gavin, it's a great pleasure to have you on the show. Good morning to you.
Yeah, morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm very, very well. Tell me, mate, did you start as a journalist before you became an energy reporter, or you always interested in energy and that's how you got to be a journalist?
No, it was started as a journalist and then just by accident during the sort of power reforms of the 1980s and 90s, I just kind of got involved in it and it's always been very interesting. So I've been lucky enough to stay involved in it. Yeah.
So, and it's a specialist area at the end of the day, requiring a specialist expertise. You'd know most of the players and most of the changes. Just going back to that very first moment, are we in part in trouble now in 2024 because of the heavily deregulated nature of the electricity industry?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, there's so many different tracks the sector could have taken. You know, in what you're talking about, you know, the past 30 years. I mean, there's been a lot of really good things done. There's been a lot of private investment in generation. There was originally going to be a lot of reform of lines companies and things like that, which never really happened, and possibly still needs to now. But I think the basic framework of the system has worked quite well up till now. But if you think about the way that we designed the electricity system back in the 90s, it was very much predicated on there always being a cheap supply of plentiful gas to keep a bit of price competition among the players and stop the hydro operators just charging whatever they like for water. And
so
of course that kind of relationship's broken down now. Yeah.
And now the relationship's broken down to the extent where there are gas fields just off New Zealand, as we know. They are significant, as I'm aware. But there is now an economic question as to whether or not they should be, in actual fact, developed at all, because there's no certainty for those gas companies. Have I got that right?
That's really where things are heading. I don't think this is a closed discussion yet, but the reforms that the previous government kicked off, really chilled the gas sector. I mean, a lot of work has still carried on in the past 4 or 5 years. You know, there's been ongoing drilling to keep gas supplies going, but like you say, people are trying to make bets about investments in fields that would have 20 or 30 years life, or gas-fired peaking plants that would have 20 or 30 years life. If there isn't certainty about what role gas is going to play in our energy mix in the future, then it's really hard to make those bets. And there used to be a pretty broad political consensus in this country that gas would always play a role in energy supply. And that kind of got vaporised in 2018.
And what happened in 2018?
Well, that was when the former government decided that there'd be, a ban on offshore exploration. Unfortunately, people focus on the offshore exploration ban, but it was actually much wider than that. They kicked off a whole series of initiatives, changes to the decommissioning laws, changes to the way we issue onshore permits, and it just, it's just broken the model. It's not that it can't be fixed, but it's going to take time to undo the damage.
There was also, and forgive me if you'd know better than I will, but I vaguely recall, and I'll explain why. I was mayor of Wanganui, and Wanganui Gas was quite big as a reticulator of gas, not just retailing it, but also putting it in pipes and relaying it into houses and homes in the North Island. As I understand, there's a ban on new reticulation. Is that right? In New Zealand, in residential areas and subdivisions from, is it 2030 or even before?
Well, there isn't strictly a ban yet. It's been advocated. The Climate Change Commission was very keen on it. It's problematic. It's really sent, again, it's just one of those kind of initiatives that tells people that gas doesn't have a future. And when you tell people that, they not only stop making gas connections, but they start making decisions to take out, gas water heaters and things early, and it just doesn't help. The residential gas market in New Zealand is small but very important. If you just think about the event we had last night, if we didn't have, a lot of North Island homes in the major centres on gas, you imagine if all that heating and lighting load was on electricity. Heating and hot water was on electricity. You can only imagine how high the demand would have been. We are so lucky to have those dual fuel options in the North Island. That people take for granted, and they don't really understand how important gas is.
Now, the other thing also, I've just read a newsroom report this morning by a major online media company, as you know, Newsroom, essentially talking about this particular issue, but arguing that gas and fossil fuels in general, well, obviously petrol, diesel, gas, are global killers. And gas has a program attached to it, certainly in the eyes of this particular journalist, that means that it is essentially an evil fuel. I mean, those sorts of value judgments are being made about it. You can see that, I guess, in the policy directives of 2018 onwards, that if you start to develop these fossil fuels, you're somehow committing genocide against Tuvalu, or, incinerating your children's future, etc., etc. Is that another reason why the investors might have been scared away from the gas industry, because it is considered to be politically or at least morally unpalatable?
I think it's an odd approach, isn't it? And we see it in New Zealand far worse than in other parts of the world. I mean, there is definitely a move against hydrocarbons. Step back. I mean, I would say, I look at energy and I say all forms of energy have their roles to play. All have pluses and all have minuses. Wind is great when it's there, but it's not always there. Gas is good. It's very flexible. It's fast. It's relatively easy to store. But it comes with hydrocarbons. It comes with fewer hydrocarbons than coal. Coal is even easier to store, but, it has to be extracted from somewhere. So all these things have pluses and minuses, and kind of putting labels on particular fuels doesn't help, because for those who want to see climate change controlled or limited, you just have to focus on the emissions. If you focus on reducing emissions, the fuel supply and those sort of things will solve themselves. Gas, gas in this country does play a really important role, and people trying to turn it into some sort of evil just doesn't reflect that at all. And it's not reflected in any of the international agencies that look at these things. The IPCC's targets for climate emission reduction, they don't assume that the world suddenly gets rid of all oil and gas. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, they have a sort of map to how you get the world to net zero by 2050, and their modelling still assumes that we use about a quarter as much gas now and about a quarter of the oil that we're using now. So it's a big reduction, but it still has to be there.
So if I got this right, so your thesis is that in 2018, when gas and oil exploration were considered verboten, it wasn't simply that exploration was considered verboten. There were a series of consequential and current impediments put before gas being reticulated throughout New Zealand, and investments being made over the last 6 years. So is it reasonable for the Minister, Simeon Brown, to lay some of the, not so much political, but some of the organisational blame for what we are experiencing now upon the previous government?